Andrew Carnegie was not born into opportunity. He was born into obsolescence. Before he became the Steel King of America, before his fortune became so large it could fund libraries across continents, he was just a poor boy in Scotland watching the world quietly destroy his family. His father was a handloom weaver, skilled, honest, proud, and suddenly useless because history had changed the rules. Machines were taking over. Factories were swallowing old trades whole. Men who had once fed families with their hands were now standing in the shadow of industrial power. Carnegie did not grow up learning economics from books. He learned it from fear, realizing the future had arrived without asking for permission. He watched work disappear. He watched dignity shrink. He watched his family lose the one thing poverty always steals first: certainty. So in 1848, when Andrew was still a child, the family made the kind of decision people make when staying is just a slower form of ruin. They left Scotland and crossed the Atlantic to America. They did not come chasing luxury. They came chasing air. But America did not greet Carnegie with comfort. It handed him a factory. At around 12 years old, he became a bobbin boy in a cotton mill near Pittsburgh. The work was brutal. The hours were long. The pay was almost insulting. He spent his days inside noise, dust, heat. This was not the beginning of a dream. It was survival in its rawest form. But Carnegie had something dangerous inside him. He was not content to suffer quietly. He watched everything. He remembered everything. And he understood something early. In the New World, the man who stayed still got crushed. So he moved. First to a telegraph office as a messenger boy. Then upward again. That job mattered because suddenly Andrew was not trapped inside one room. He was moving through the bloodstream of the city. He was entering offices, meeting businessmen, watching deals move faster than freight, listening to power speak in numbers, schedules, and urgency. Then he taught himself to read telegraph signals by ear. That changed everything. Now he was no longer just a poor immigrant kid delivering messages. He was becoming useful to men who mattered. And in every era of capitalism, that is the first real ladder. Make yourself indispensable to people who already have power. One of those men was Thomas A. Scott of the Pennsylvania Railroad. Scott saw something in Carnegie: discipline, hunger, speed, and pulled him closer. Under Scott, Carnegie learned the real machinery of American business. Railroads were not just trains, they were the arteries of the nation. Whoever understood them understood growth, expansion, logistics, and money itself. And Carnegie learned fast. Fastrier than Maul. He rose through the railroad system, and with each new position, he absorbed the lesson that would define the rest of his life. Adapt and persevere. This defines my life. Wages could keep you alive. Ownership could make you untouchable, so he began to invest. Small stakes at first, careful ones: sleeping cars, bridges, iron, anything connected to the infrastructure of a growing country. Carnegie was still young, but he had already seen enough poverty to know that labor alone would never make him free. Then came the Civil War. And with war came pressure, scale, logistics, urgency. Carnegie worked with the railroad and military transport systems during the conflict, and the experience sharpened him. This was industry under stress, movement under fire, growth under chaos. And when the war ended, America did not slow down. It accelerated. Railroads spread, cities swelled, factories multiplied, fortunes were built at speeds earlier generations would have thought unnatural. Carnegie looked at this new America and saw not a country, but a construction site. And every construction site needed one thing: stronger metal. He entered iron first. Then he saw the future more clearly than most men around him. Not old steel, not slow steel, cheap steel, scaled steel, industrial steel. That insight changed his life. Carnegie became obsessed with the Bessemer process, a method that made steel faster and cheaper to produce. Where others saw technical detail, he saw national destiny. Railroads needed steel. Factories needed steel. Cities rising into the sky would need steel. America was becoming a machine, and Carnegie intended to sell it its bones. So he built. mill after mill, company after company, system after system, and he did not build casually. He built like a man trying to outrun his childhood. He cut costs relentlessly. He studied production obsessively. He integrated operations wherever he could, raw materials, transportation, manufacturing.
He wanted control over the chain, because control meant speed, and speed meant dominance. This was conquest in a business suit.
By the 1880s, Carnegie Steel had become one of the most powerful industrial forces in the United States. He had transformed himself from a poor immigrant child into one of the central architects of the American industrial age. Bridges rose because of steel. Rail lines expanded because of steel. Cities hardened into permanence because of steel. And Andrew Carnegie was everywhere inside that transformation. But every empire has a cost. And steel had one written in sweat. Andrew Carnegie presented himself as a man of intellect, self-improvement, and civilization. He spoke about progress, music, cultivation, and peace. But his factories were part of a world that devoured labor. The hours were punishing. The conditions were dangerous. The pressure was constant. Efficiency made Carnegie richer, but it often made the lives of workers harsher, tighter, more disposable. The same empire that lifted him into history also ground thousands of men into exhaustion. That contradiction exploded in Homestead, Pennsylvania, in 1892. The Homestead Steel Strike became one of the most infamous labor battles in American history. Carnegie was in Scotland at the time, far from the smoke and confrontation. But his company and his partner Henry Clay Frick faced workers with hard force. Tensions escalated. Men died. And whatever image Carnegie hoped to preserve as a refined industrial philosopher was stained permanently by steel, blood, and silence.
That is what makes his story powerful. He was not just a hero. He was not just a villain. He was something more historically dangerous.
A builder of the modern world who benefited from its cruelty while preaching its improvement. And still, the money kept growing. By the end of the 19th century, Carnegie had become one of the richest men on earth. His company dominated steel. His influence touched industry at every level.
He had done what millions dream about and almost no one achieves. He had climbed from the very bottom into the financial stratosphere. Then came the final deal.
In 1901, financier J.P. Morgan bought Carnegie Steel. The sale helped create U.S. Steel, one of the first billion-dollar corporations. This massive transaction shocked the world and reshaped industry. Carnegie walked away with roughly $480 million in bonds and securities. A poor immigrant boy from Scotland had become one of the richest human beings alive. That should have been the end of the story. Retire, count the money, protect the name, disappear into luxury. But Carnegie made a different move. He turned toward legacy. Years earlier, he had argued that the man who dies rich dies disgraced. It was one of those lines that sounds noble, suspicious, and brilliant all at once. Because only a man who had already won completely could say it that confidently. But Carnegie meant it. Or at least he acted like he did. He began giving away his fortune on a scale the world had rarely seen. Libraries, universities, schools, foundations, music halls. Years earlier, he had argued that the man who dies rich dies disgraced. It was one of those lines that sounds noble, suspicious, and brilliant all at once. Because only a man who had already won completely could say it that confidently. But Carnegie meant it. Or at least he acted like he did. He began giving away his fortune on a scale the world had rarely seen. Libraries, universities, schools, foundations, music halls, research institutions, public learning, international peace efforts. He believed knowledge had opened the world to him, so he funded libraries by the thousands. He believed wealth carried obligation, so he developed what became known as the gospel of wealth, the idea that the rich should distribute their fortunes for the public good during their lifetimes. And so the final act of Andrew Carnegie's life became almost as dramatic as the first. First, the poor boy in a collapsing old world. Then the industrial conqueror of the Steel Age. Then the old titan trying to turn private fortune into public memory. He He spent decades making steel. Then he spent the rest of his life trying to make meaning. Was it generosity? Was it redemption? Was it a master strategist shaping how history would judge him? Probably all three. Because Carnegie understood something many rich men never do. Money is power, but legacy is control beyond death. When Andrew Carnegie died in 1919, he left behind more than wealth. He left behind a contradiction large enough to fill a century. He proved that capitalism could turn a starving immigrant child into a king of industry. He also proved that the same system could produce greatness and brutality in the same man. That is why his story still matters. Not because he got rich, not because he gave money away. Andrew Carnegie exposed the full machinery of modern ambition. Poverty, hunger, intelligence, ruthlessness, scale, guilt, philanthropy, and the eternal human need to be remembered for something cleaner than the road we took to get there. Andrew Carnegie did not just build steel, he helped build America, and then he spent the rest of his life trying to convince the world that he had built something more than a fortune.